Join us on an investigative journey as we educate each other on a scientific discovery, concept, or phenomenon.
Then we'll take a dive into the complicated and misleading world of pseudoscience to sort the factual from the fabricated.
I'm Matt McCabe.
And I'm Levi Bateman.
And this is IdioFacto. So happy birthday for yesterday.
Thank you, yes. 28 years old.
Wow, you're ancient.
I'm officially in my late 20s.
Oh, were you not before?
I don't know. When does it start?
Well, I guess what are we saying? 24 to 26 is mid-20s?
Ah, damn it. Okay, I've been there
Yeah,
for
sorry.
years.
You've already been there. As someone officially in their late 20s, I can tell you that it changes very little.
Yeah, I mean, 28 sucks, but imagine being almost 30. Whoa. Man, that's old.
Listen, I'm going to squeeze this 10 months for all they're worth. So, wait, 9 months. Uh-oh.
Remember your 18th? Well, there's less time between now and when you're 40 than there was between now and your 18th.
No, don't say things like that.
Time will move even faster, I'm sure. It's fine. It's fine, though. Yeah.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with being 40.
Well, I'll let you know what it's like when I get there.
Okay. We'll be on episode 600 of IdioFacto.
Yeah.
We'll have covered all scientific and pseudoscientific topics, and we'll just be talking absolute waffle.
Yeah, well, we already talk waffle, so...
Yeah, we're pretty close to it.
Well, we're actually recording this week, which is a nice change, since I got stuck at the fires last week.
Yeah, tell us about that. What happened?
So that was pretty cool to actually see, having spoken about the helicopters and auto-rotating, and I didn't see any auto-rotating.
Oh, that's a good thing.
Thank goodness, yeah. But I did see plenty dropping water, which was pretty cool to see them filling up, hovering about 10 metres above a dam and doing exactly what we were talking about in episode 1, so that was pretty cool.
So how'd this fire start?
Lightning. Well, it's believed to be lightning. We had a big storm without any rain, and it started 4 or 5 fires around Victoria. Given how dry it's been in Victoria in the last couple of years, it was bound to happen at some stage, I think.
And the area where you were fighting the fire, really steep country.
Very inaccessible. In fact, most of the time I was following a bulldozer trying to get access to the fire itself. It was just hard to get to, really, and there was big trees over the tracks and things like that, so tracks that hadn't been accessed in decades.
Yeah, not as simple as just rocking up and getting on the back of the truck and...
putting wet stuff on hot stuff.
That's right. The firefighter's code. Find them hot, leave them wet.
Yep, and the other one is hurry up and wait, which I can definitely relate to now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I believe you're starting this week. It's your turn for science, isn't it?
I am. Yep. It's Science Week with Levi.
That's not going to be a thing.
Okay.
Science Week with Levi.
Yeah, so, well, what if I told you that I had an energy solution that was cleaner than coal, that we could start using right now, but it wasn't quite to the stage of renewables? Would you be all for it? What do you reckon?
We'd still have to keep using non-renewables. So this is a non-renewable...
Yeah, I'm talking about a non-renewable resource.
Okay, but it's better than coal.
Yeah, it's much cleaner than coal.
I mean, it sounds okay to me so far. Obviously, I'd rather move towards renewable completely, but that's an unrealistic expectation at the moment. So I would say I'd be for it.
Yeah, cool. Well, the non-renewable resource that I'm talking about is natural gas, which is mainly methane. Methane is found everywhere. It's found in our atmosphere in relatively small amounts. It's actually a more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide.
Yeah, a lot more. It's like 20 times as powerful, isn't it?
That's right, but it's not as abundant in the atmosphere as what CO2 is. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of sources for it. Anaerobic decomposition, cows burp and fart and produce methane.
And there's lots of cows too.
Matt of IdioFacto produces a lot of methane.
Well, you know.
Just doing your part.
Hot air's got to come from somewhere.
But we do have a lot of uses for this natural gas. So electricity production is a big one. So as I was saying, it's a much cleaner burn than coal. So when it's burned, it releases about half as much CO2 as coal, 50 times less carbon monoxide, 50 times less nitrogen oxides, and less than 0.4% of the sulfur dioxide and particulates that come from coal. And unlike coal, it releases zero mercury into the atmosphere. So it's a pretty clean energy source. It can also be used in domestic applications, so for cooking, gas, hot water. It's used in transport as a fuel for internal combustion engines. And there's actually another use that I found, which I didn't know about. It's actually pretty cool. It's used to produce fish and animal feed. So they basically feed this natural gas to a bacteria called, I'm going to try and say it, Methylococcus capsulatus.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So they feed it to the bacteria, and the bacteria grow, and I don't know all about the process, but they can basically produce animal and fish food from this bacteria.
Okay.
But there's a few different sources of natural gas. So there's biogas, which comes from the anaerobic decomposition of organic matter.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from a byproduct of producing oil. There's something called town gas, which comes from the destructive distillation of coal to produce these volatile calorific gases, methane being one of them. But the source that we're interested in is shale gas. So shale gas is what we're concerned with today. To get to shale gas, we basically have to perform a process called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it's known to most people. So basically, this shale layer, shale is a layer in the Earth's crust, and it's a pretty tight matrix. Its structure is quite tight, and it's too tight to allow gas to actually flow through.
So it's not actually a layer though, is it? It's a type of rock. It's not a layer that's all over the world, only in some areas.
Not necessarily all over the world.
Shale is a type of rock.
That's right, yeah, and it's sort of found in layers.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily it's not like the mantle or the crust. It's not a layer that you hit regardless of where you are.
Yeah. So the way I understand shale is that it's basically just mud particles that have been laid down over a really long period of time in layers. So it is sort of like sheets of really old compressed mud.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So when it breaks off, it often, like when you see shale on the surface, it's often like big sheets, like big tiles.
Yeah. And
it breaks off like that. But yeah, you're right, it's compressed mud, but it's pretty tight. So the gas can't flow through it. We can't just drill a hole and expect that the gas is going to race out of the shale.
Right. So where does that gas come from? Is it trapped organisms?
In this case, it is, yeah. So it's...
From the anaerobic...
Yeah, from the anaerobic decomposition of organic matter that were trapped, I guess, trapped in the mud. Probably in this case, it was perhaps algae or small organisms, things like that lived in the mud at the time.
Yeah. So shale's a really common place to find fossils as well, macrofossils, because if anything with a hard shell dies and is covered in mud, it usually is really well preserved in the shale.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that explains why there's lots of ancient organisms trapped and decomposed anaerobically.
Yeah, out of all the layers, there's probably, there's not a great deal in limestone, I suppose, but shale, there's probably a high concentration of dead, decaying organic matter.
And probably not so much in sandstone because there's a lot of air for it to bubble out. Is that about right?
Well, yeah, you're right. So the way that we get to this gas is by this process called fracking, hydraulic fracturing. So essentially what happens is there's exploration work that's done, and usually it involves geologists. They work out where the shale is and what is the likelihood that that shale will contain this natural gas. So once they've worked that out, the drilling begins. They drill, it's called a well bore. They put this well bore and they send the drill down to a depth of about 2.5 to 3 kilometres, which is a real deep hole. And then once they're at that depth, they're in the shale layer. The drill turns at a right angle and they drill for another 1 to 2 kilometres. So they've got this hole, this tunnel essentially. It's only small, but it runs for, about 2 kilometres, 1.5 to 2 kilometres, parallel to the Earth's surface. Then they send down this perforating gun, and essentially what it does is every couple of metres, it sends these spikes. It shoots the rock around it, and it sends cracks through the rock. So these cracks start to form, but they're only very fine cracks, and only at the surface level, essentially.
Right.
And then what happens, once the cracks are in place, then you can set up the process for the fracking itself, so the actual hydraulic fracturing. So they set up these really, really high-powered pumps that are capable of really high-pressure and they set them up at the top of the hole, at the top of the well bore, and this is when the fracking can begin. So into the well bore is pumped a mixture of water, proppants, which is these fine little particles.
Proppants.
Proppants, yeah. Which is sand, usually sand or clay, and these basically keep the cracks open. Once the proppants have entered the cracks, then the water can flow out.
So like prop as in to prop open, proppants as in...
Propants. Yeah, to prop open. And in this mix, there's also some chemicals. Now, what's in the chemicals? We don't really know, because each fracking company essentially says that this is an industry secret. It's intellectual property, and they don't disclose what each of the chemicals is.
What are the chemicals used for?
There's a few different purposes for them. They contain lubricants to help the water and the gas and the proppants to flow easier, and detergents for a similar process. Detergents will make the water wetter, if you will. There's antibacterials in there to kill the bacteria, because as we know, some bacteria consume natural gas. There's salts and solvents. And so each of these chemicals has got a different purpose. Some of it is to improve the flow of the water into and out of the hole and the crack, and some of it is to actually to improve the process of the cracking itself. So these solvents, some of them actually help to begin to dissolve the rock so that the cracks can form. So what happens is this is all pumped down, very, very high pressure, and this high pressure actually is what does the main job of cracking the rock even further. So the gun that's sent down first, that cracks the rock, just starts the crack. And as we know, water's actually really powerful. You know, if you've ever had a crack in your windscreen and it's rained overnight, and then you've had a really cold, or it's wet, you've had a really cold night, if water gets in somewhere and it freezes inside that crack, it can actually crack your windscreen even further. The same thing can happen with rocks in a rock face. If water gets in and then it freezes, it can actually be really destructive.
That's what happens in alpine regions. A major way that rock erosion occurs is by that exact process.
That's right. Small cracks filling with water, temperature dropping to below zero, water freezing, and as we all know, when water freezes, it expands, and nothing's going to stop that, not even the power of rock, so it busts it open. So that's what happens underground in these fracking wells, is the water is such high pressure. Combined with the chemicals, it does a really good job of cracking the rock. So what happens then is the water's pumped back out, and the water's got gas with it, and it basically allows, once you release this fracking pressure from the pumps, the gas is free to leave the shale and to flow out through the water to the surface, where it's then harvested. The water has to be dealt with, though, because it contains a lot of stuff that you don't want just lying around. So to do that, initially, they put it in these big storage tanks, and then it goes to a wastewater treatment facility, or gets pumped down into very, very deep, even deeper than the fracking wells, into very deep underground wells, and it's stored under there. So, as you can imagine, there's a little bit going on, and there's a few issues with fracking. So anybody that's got a property near a new fracking site probably has something to say about it. So the first issue that a lot of people have is that they say that the mining company, the natural resource company, shouldn't just be allowed to come onto your property, because that's kind of what they can do. There's some strange laws in mining, but basically you own the land at the surface, but anything that's underground you have no control over. And if there's something valuable underground, essentially these companies are allowed to come onto your property and say, we're going to set up a bore and extract these minerals for the good of the earth. So understandably, a lot of people have got an issue with that.
Is there not any sort of compensation if they are putting infrastructure on your property?
Yeah, I think there is. It's a bit like a wind turbine, so you get paid for the amount of turbines that are on your property. I think this would be the same if they're using a portion of your land, then you would get compensated, but I don't think that's the issue with a lot of people. A lot of people feel that it's no longer safe to actually even live at your home when there's a fracking well nearby.
Right. How well-founded are these concerns?
Well, they are. There is good reason to be concerned. Essentially, the water's not safe to drink. So this slick water that comes up out of ground is about 90% water and 10% other chemicals.
That's a lot. That's a large percentage of other chemicals.
It is. So like I was talking before, there's lubricants, detergents, antibacterials, solvents, salts. It's definitely not safe to drink as it is.
No, but you said it's pumped into wells that are even deeper than the fracking wells themselves.
Sometimes, yeah. So that's one of the solutions.
Okay.
Another potential solution is dilution. Mm-hmm. And what do we say?
Some pithy chemist's high school saying, dilution is the solution to pollution.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you dilute this slick water, if you dilute this fracking fluid by a factor of 1 to 10,000 or 1 to 100,000.
So you add 10,000 litres to every litre of this, what did you call it, slick water?
Slick water, that's right.
That's a lot of water.
Yeah, it is. So you do need a lot of fresh water, but it is also the kind of thing that if you do have, rivers and lakes, I'm not suggesting that, we go and pump fracking water into a river or a lake.
Yeah.
But when you consider the volume of a fast-flowing river, technically it would be feasible to release probably several thousand litres of this water every hour or so. And the dilution would be such that it would be safe to drink. Beneath it may still be measurable, but if you dilute it to that factor, that 1 to 10,000 or 1 to 100,000 for the fracking fluid, and the groundwater that comes back out, it's 1 to 1,000. Once it's more diluted with groundwater, that gets it back to a safe drinking limit. And that's the limit specified by the World Health Organization and the European Drinking Water Directive.
I guess that raises a bunch of other questions as well regarding accumulation and things like that. Like lead, for example, a lot of metals like that, heavy metals like that, accumulate, and it may be at a safe drinking level to begin with, but if you drink it over a lifetime, it may accumulate.
Yeah, exactly. So bioaccumulation is basically a small organism that feeds on something, and it's a heavy metal, like lead that you said, or mercury, and it's in a level that's not necessarily dangerous to that organism, but then the next trophic level or the next level of the food chain eats a lot of these organisms.
So the classic is fish with mercury.
Yeah, that's right. And it's one of the reasons why there's actually a health argument to not eating dolphin, as well as all the other ethical arguments as well. We shouldn't eat dolphins or any cetaceans. You also are putting yourself at risk of mercury poisoning. But that's another story. So essentially, there is an article in the Environmental Earth Sciences Journal that stated that the flowback water, or the groundwater that comes back out of the wellbore, is actually more hazardous to human health than the fracking fluid. The groundwater contains dangerous levels of salts, heavy metals, like you said, toxic constituents such as mercury, arsenic, lead, zinc, cadmium. So as you just said, these heavy metals, they do accumulate. There's not a great deal we can do about them. They do occur naturally in the Earth's crust. So there's a few issues, I suppose, but one of the main issues is what do we do with this wastewater? It can be diluted, but as you said, it takes a lot of water. So the groundwater that comes out, that can be diluted with 1 to 1,000 litres of water, and then it's safe to drink. But the fracking fluid itself, if something happens to that or the unused chemicals in this fracking fluid, that has to be diluted to a factor of 1 to 10,000 or 1 to 100,000, which that's a lot of water. So dilution perhaps isn't the most economic or the quickest way to actually dispose of this fracking fluid.
So dilution is the solution to pollution most of the time if there's enough water, and there may not be enough water.
Yeah, that's
not as catchy as the original. Though.
Yeah, the solution to pollution is still dilution, but we can't always just do it. We don't always just have gigalitres and gigalitres of water. Yeah, and you must also ensure that you're distributing the polluted water evenly across this whole water source rather than just dumping it in one area, because whatever's living in that little area is probably going to die. So what else do we do with it? We drill these enormous big underground wells, and we can pump the water all the way down there. And that's a pretty good spot for it because it's a long way from anywhere, it's well below the water table, and there's nothing that lives down there. So there's a fair chance that it's not actually doing any harm to anything. There's a couple of concerns with this as well. The question is always asked, is there a chance that these deep underground wells could leak into our artesian basins or our underground water supplies? And yes, there is a chance. there is a chance. I mean, it's unlikely, and if done properly, it shouldn't happen. But this is the case with a lot of things. The controls have to be absolutely perfect. And we haven't been fracking for all that long either. It's something that we still probably don't have a fantastic grasp on, how to deal with the wastes from fracking. So pumping it underground is probably the best solution that we've got at the moment, or the most common solution, but it's not entirely safe. And the other thing about these deep underground wells is sometimes they can contribute to earthquakes in that area. So Cliff Froelich, who was a research scientist from the Institute of Geophysics at the University of Texas, he said it's to talk about these underground wells and earthquakes and the link between them. He said he uses the air hockey table model. So essentially, he said, imagine you have an air hockey table. If you tilt it and there's no air on it, the puck will just sit there. Gravity wants it to move, but it doesn't because there's friction. But if you put the air on and you tilt the table, the puck will slide. So it's the same concept basically for tectonic plates and these, or fault lines basically, and these deep underground wells that contain millions, if not billions of litres of this waste water. It's filling a void, and it almost will make the plate or the fault that's sitting on it, it'll make it float, and it'll make it more sort of susceptible to movement, I suppose. So if there is earth or tectonic movement in that area, putting large amounts of water underground is not going to help with that, or it will help with the earthquakes.
Depends on whose perspective you're looking at.
The earthquake is probably...
If you're an earthquake, it's
Thank
great.
you. That's a good help. So that's a lot of information on fracking, and I kind of haven't really answered the question that everybody's saying, is it good or is it bad?
But that's very rarely that simple.
Exactly, yeah. It's really hard, and you almost have to make up your own mind. Annual review said it really well. They basically said that when fracking is done well, it can reduce air pollution compared with other fossil fuels. But alternatively, it could slow the adoption of renewables, and when done poorly, it could release toxic chemicals into the water and into the air. Which is true. As we said right at the start, methane is a more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And so if something goes wrong at one of these wells and they release a huge amount of methane into the air, which is what natural gas is made up of mainly, suddenly there's this very powerful greenhouse gas that's in the atmosphere, whereas prior to that it was trapped underground, never to see the light of day. The other point in that quote by the annual review, it probably is slowing the adoption of renewables. The fact that we've got this option of another non-renewable that's relatively easy to get to means that we will keep using the fossil fuel, and the money will be put into possibly developing better ways of fracking, more efficient engines that use less fossil fuels, which is still a good thing, but it is slowing that adoption of total reliance on renewable energy, which, as you said at the start, it's a hard thing to do. We can't there's not a switch that we can flick and just totally be on the other side of the fence, but I think it will come.
Having said that, coal is an essential part of the power mix going forward, and we have already invested a lot of time, money and effort in optimizing our coal mining and power generating efficiency.
That's right. As with most energy generation, things now are a hell of a lot more efficient than what they were when we first started to use it.
So I would be more inclined to say that even though this is better than coal, would it be better to stick with the devil you know for the 20 to 50 years that it'll take for us to become less reliant on fossil fuels? And something to think about anyway.
It is something to think about.
I don't know the answer, and I don't think anybody has a good answer for that.
No, it's a really hard question, and it's just like anything. I think ultimately, and this is sort of just a bit of a personal opinion of mine, but like anything that contains highly explosive fluids and toxic solutions of salts and heavy metals, if we're sloppy with it, it's going to be dangerous. If we just get a bunch of cowboys that go into a fracking site, set up their pumps, and start fracking and bring out the gas, something could go wrong. But like anything, I mean, I'm sure people were probably concerned when petroleum was first used in cars. Essentially, you're sitting on 50, 60, 100 litres of highly flammable liquid.
Yes, and the thing that's propelling your engine are small explosions contained in cylinders, which when you describe it like that sounds terrifying.
That's right, that sounds really scary. Yeah, but if you get the controls right and if you get the design better, the process becomes safer. And I think the same is true of fracking. We just have to be really, really careful. We have to make sure that these fracking sites are well audited, that they're well controlled, that we find a reasonable place to store the wastewater, be that a really deep underground well or diluted in a pristine river somewhere. That's not up to me. And the technology will improve and it will change. Looks like fracking is going to continue. But the thing with fracking is that this gas that's stored in the shale layer, it's probably could sustain us and could provide us with fossil fuels for another 2 to 3 decades, which is not really all that long. It's not a fantastic solution to our energy crisis.
In some ways, that's comforting. 2 or 3 decades worth of fossil fuels more. Then eventually, whether it be our generation or the next, we're going to have to go renewable, at least for part of the power mix. We just can't. We're going to run out. They're non-renewable.
I mean, it'll happen in my lifetime. You're 30. I'm much younger. I'm only 28.
I'm not 30, mate.
Nearly 30. But we'll see it within the next few decades, I think. Renewable resources will become a lot more common, a lot more efficient, and hopefully more of the world adopts them. But until then, maybe these fringe fossil fuel sources like shale gas are the way to go. Who knows? Watch this space.
And I think the message that I would want to put out is that it's unreasonable for us to move immediately and completely to renewable energy. There's going to have to be a transitional period, and any reasonable, thoughtful, skeptical person should acknowledge that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Alright, so I've got a question for you, Levi.
Go for it.
You fairly recently had some pretty serious back issues.
Yes, I sure did.
And I have in the past had some very similar back injuries from soccer, and I know how much it can hurt. What did you do to mitigate the effects of those injuries?
I was experiencing sciatic pain, so it started in my lower back, began to migrate down my right leg, right down through my calf to my foot over time. It just got worse and worse, and became quite bad. I went to a couple of doctors and a physio. I never had any scans or anything, so this is all anecdotal, I suppose, but it turned out to be a suspected bulged disc, which pushes on the spinal nerve. So it got quite bad. I was bedridden for a couple of days at one point. And even then I was still in extreme pain. Nothing helped the pain.
No drugs or anything?
I tried some pretty heavy drugs, but nothing really worked. And I later spoke to somebody who'd experienced sciatica from a bulged disc. And they said that usually tramadol or any of these opiate-based drugs aren't great for treating nerve pain. So none of the pharmaceutical drugs that I was trying were doing any good. So I just basically waited it out. I stopped doing self-administered stretches that I thought would be good for my back, but probably weren't. And eventually over time it just got better. Mine was self-inflicted. Essentially I was going way too hard. My man, Chrissy, had just bought our house and I was going way too hard, lifting heavy blocks of limestone and digging holes for fish ponds and planting fruit trees and that kind of thing. And when my back started to hurt, I just kept going. But
yeah, and so you went to a physiotherapist?
I went to a physio, yeah. They suggested a few sort of simple exercises, mainly like core strengthening exercises.
So that's called exercise therapy.
Right, yeah.
Which, for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you hit on the concept that I am going to be coming back to while I'm talking about chiropractic. And that's that really the best way of dealing with especially back pain is rest.
Okay, well, it's certainly effective for me.
It kept coming back every time you would do something. You would feel a bit better, and then you'd do something else and it'd be back to how it was before, which is because you weren't giving it enough rest, basically. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I was giving it enough rest so that it felt better at the time, but I wasn't giving enough rest for it to actually heal deep down.
And like you said, you didn't get any scans. And did you go to a doctor and request any sort of medicine or?
I went to a pharmacist and requested a stronger anti-inflammatory to use as a painkiller and an anti-inflammatory, I suppose. But I sort of didn't dig too deeply into it.
You're telling me you didn't go to a chiropractor?
No, I didn't go to a chiropractor. I had every second or third person that I spoke to that I mentioned back pain to, they said, have you tried the chiro? And poking and prodding and cracking and twisting wasn't really what I felt would have been good for my back in that situation.
You're right. It probably wouldn't have helped you. Should have put a spoiler alert in front of that, but that's okay. I've put chiropractic in the pseudoscience area for a reason.
Okay.
It was invented in 1895 by a guy named D.D. Palmer. I imagine the D.D. stands for something, but...
So you've said invented rather than discovered.
Well...
There's the first giveaway, I suppose.
He was a magnetic healer.
Oh, what does that do? Has that got anything to do with animal magnetism discussed in episode 3 of IdioFacto?
Actually, it probably does. I didn't look too far into magnetic healing because once I read that it involved the use of magnets to heal, which is pretty self-explanatory by the name, I guess, but... Once I read that, I didn't look any further into it and just went, right, so he was a quack. That's got it.
Hang on, don't dismiss it because there could be an episode on that.
Oh, okay, well, stay tuned because magnetic healing might be a thing. If we break down the word chiropractic, chiro is from the Greek chiro, meaning hand, and practicos, meaning practical. So it means hand practical. I don't really know where that came from. And yes, chiropractic is the noun.
Not chiropractics?
No, chiropractic.
Okay.
It's very annoying. Anyway, this guy, D.D. Palmer, he adjusted a deaf man's back. So put pressure in a certain area on a deaf man's back and apparently cured his deafness.
Wow.
Came back and said, I am no longer deaf. Thank you. Whatever you did to my back fixed my deafness.
Right.
From this single case, he decided that he could cure deafness.
I kind of want to know about what actually happened to that man, though.
Well, I mean, it was 1895, so just for interest's sake, I'll pretend to be a chiropractor and I'll ask you what causes disease, do you think?
Okay. What do I think causes disease? I guess it depends on the disease. There's probably a whole lot of genetic factors. There's external factors like toxins. There's viruses and bacteria.
No, that's not the case, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, no, 95% of all diseases are caused by subluxations.
What?
Subluxations. Subluxation.
Subluxation.
Yep.
What is that? What are these?
A misalignment of the vertebra.
Wow.
Yep.
95% of illnesses.
95%, yeah.
Wow, do they believe that?
Do you know what the other 5% are caused by?
Tell me.
Other misaligned joints, as in not in the spine.
Every illness that humans can get is caused by a misalignment of the spine or another joint.
Yes. That's what the original chiropractor, the inventor of chiropractic, believed.
Oh, okay.
He came up with this theory after he'd cured the deaf man's deafness.
Ah, right.
So he didn't do anything to try and disprove that result, I should say.
Yep.
And he was actually pretty secretive about it. He wanted to keep it very cult-like and more like a religion. But his son, BJ, I don't know why they only go by their acronyms, but his son BJ started the first chiropractic school.
Okay.
And he was kind of a marketing genius, really.
Yeah, well, it's still around today, so he must have been doing something right.
Yeah. They both wanted to establish it as a religion and thought that the way that disease is caused by the misalignments is that it disrupts the flow of innate, and innate is pretty much chi. It's a natural energy.
Innate is the noun.
Innate is a noun, yes. I don't know why they make adjectives nouns, but innate, and it's always capitalized. INNATE, innate.
Oh, it's a pronoun.
Yes, and it's...
Oh wait, it's a proper noun. Oh, how do I grammar? How do I?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
continue.
they clearly can't grammar. The innate needs a straight path to flow. So the energy, the natural energy that occurs in people needs a path to flow. And when your spine is misaligned, that's when you get problems.
Energy is such a broad term, though, that you can use.
Well, this is very specific kind of energy. This is innate.
Right.
That's all I can tell you about it because that's about all that they've established about it.
So how does it innate affect the human body?
Your body, it constantly wants to be healthy. and it uses this innate to make you healthy. And so if it can't flow, then you won't be healthy.
Okay.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense.
Sure, it makes perfect sense, yes. There are over 200 accepted manipulation techniques, some manual with hands, some using tools, some lower back, some upper back, some neck, some wrist, various types.
When you say manipulation, you're talking about the big crunch, right?
Sometimes it's a crunch. It depends on the technique. Sometimes it's a crunch. Sometimes it's just pressure. Sometimes it's more like a massage. Or very often it's a sudden movement, a cracking of the joint. Often it's accompanied by a crack of some description.
Right. Which sounds very effective.
Yes, it does. It has a real... You know when you crack your knuckles and you go, ah...
Yeah, that's right.
Yep. Same sort of thing. None of these techniques, at least when they were first introduced, were based on any mainstream science. You'll often find a common thread with chiropractic in that they know that the techniques work. It's just that the science hasn't backed them up yet. So they do things with the expectation that eventually science will catch up, but that's not how science works.
No.
If there's no evidence to suggest that something is helpful, then as we've said many times in the past, there's no evidence to suggest that it's helpful. There's no reason why you should try it. In fact, it could be dangerous.
But these guys were relying on colloquial evidence that it was effective though, right?
Yeah, it's very anecdotal. In fact, the only thing that chiropractic was originally based on was a single anecdote of a man who was apparently deaf. He was cured, but his hearing was just better. Anyway, chiropractic has established its own journals as well to support the research that's done. So they don't publish in mainstream journals, they publish in chiropractic journals.
So that you can say that it's in a journal. It looks official.
It does. And if chiropractors publish in journals that are maintained by chiropractors, it's going to be a much more credulous audience. There won't be someone who's skeptical of chiropractic looking over these papers and going, well, did you try this? Or why aren't there this many people? Why don't you have more case studies? Or why don't you have a better control? Or there's no one critically analysing these, trying to disprove them.
Right, okay.
The only area of chiropractic that's even vaguely supported by mainstream medicine is spinal manipulative therapy, or SMT, sometimes just SM, spinal manipulation. So that's a treatment for lower back injuries, whereby the movement and the cracking, I'm not 100% sure on which particular spinal manipulation techniques are or are not supported by science, because there are over 200, but mainstream medicine recommends exercise therapy, so what you had been given from the physio, and standard medical care, as in pain management, drugs, and rest. There's not enough evidence at the moment to say that spinal manipulation is clinically relevant.
Okay.
So a 2004 Cochrane review, there's our mates from the Cochrane Library again, looked at 39 randomized clinical trials, RCTs, and found that spinal manipulation therapy had no statistically or clinically significant advantage over medically recommended techniques. So, like I said, exercise therapy, rest, and pain management drugs.
Okay.
They updated that review in 2011 and looked at a further 26 randomized clinical trials and found that despite a high risk of bias in up to 2/3 of the papers, so they include papers from chiropractic journals, even including those, there was no clinically relevant difference between spinal manipulation therapy and other interventions. Which means that even though they showed results that were better than placebo, they are not clinically relevant. They are not shown to be better than rest and exercise therapy.
Okay, and I'm guessing rest and exercise therapy have far fewer side effects than these manipulations?
Yes, that's the case.
As with anything that's less invasive, I guess.
Yeah, there hasn't been a lot of research on the cost effectiveness of spinal manipulation therapy, but the argument of a lot of chiropractors is that you can do in 2 or 3 sessions of chiropractic what it would take 6 months of rest and exercise therapy to do.
Oh.
That's a common argument, but there's very little to no evidence, high quality evidence that that's the case. Most of what exists is potentially very biased because it's in chiropractic journals.
Yeah, you can't really get away from that.
No, you can't. That is the problem with any science behind chiropractic, is that most of the science in inverted commas is done in chiropractic journals only and not in mainstream medical journals.
So I guess in the research for this episode, you would have had to be very careful in choosing journals.
I think that the best option is to look at places like the Cochrane Library and other systematic review places, because they'll take in all of the published evidence and evaluate the level of bias in them to try and iron out what the actual meta-analysis basically of each technique is.
Yeah, and they themselves have no bias. They're following no agenda.
That's right.
They're just after the truth.
So there's a lot of different branches of chiropractic as well. Like, there's no one way to practice chiropractic, and there are a lot of chiropractors that still believe in the subluxation theory. So a misalignment of the vertebra is the cause of disease. That's still a very common belief. However, not all chiropractors believe that. There are many who reject the entire subluxation theory and say the only thing that's really effective is the spinal manipulation, and it's really only effective for lower back injuries. And we should ditch all of the pseudoscientific aspects of chiropractic and therefore be treated as a true science.
That's sort of hopeful.
But that's a minority of
okay.
chiropractors, and we'll get further into this, but my argument would be, why would you continue to be a chiropractor then? In that case, why not be a physiotherapist or something like that? Someone who still performs spinal manipulation therapy but not under the guise of subluxation theory. Or
yeah, that's a very good point.
The subluxation theory is a complete rejection of germ theory altogether, and any of those things that cause disease that you mentioned earlier, any external factors, it's all from within. That is flat out anti-scientific. There's not a lick of science to that. And many of the more skeptical or less credulous chiropractors would agree. However, that it's not a majority of chiropractors that believe that.
Right, and it's kind of like if there was a priest that said to his parish that he didn't actually believe in God, but he said it's a nice thing to go to church because you get to read a book. Yeah. So why not just host a book club?
Exactly. So the 2011 review mentioned that the decision for doctors to refer patients for spinal manipulation therapy should be based upon costs, preferences of the patient and providers, and relative safety of the treatment options. So, like I said, spinal manipulation therapy is practiced by physiotherapists and some massage therapists, and also some doctors. And so there's options for spinal manipulation that doesn't involve going to chiropractors.
Right, okay. So you can go to a doctor or a physio and they may still do something that resembles chiropractic.
That's right.
And it might be quite effective.
It may or may... the jury's out, I would say, on whether or not it is effective. It does seem to be somewhat effective. Whether it is more effective than other treatments is highly doubtful.
Okay.
The problem that I have with chiropractic is the way it masquerades itself as legitimate medicine and claims to treat a variety of illnesses that are not demonstrably not caused by spinal issues.
Right. So it makes sense that if you're performing a spinal manipulation, that it may have some sort of effect on back pain.
Yes.
Because you're physically dealing with that area and it may actually be having some sort of physical effect. But when you're using chiropractic to treat, I'm sure you're going to get into what
they claim to treat.
For.
Yep.
Mm.
Yes, like I said, it's not all chiropractors who claim these things, but it is the majority. Chiropractors also generally give advice that they're not qualified to give. The practice lends itself to other more harmful pseudosciences like anti-vaccination, which we have spoken about.
Really? They're linked?
Well, they're not linked, but the dismissal of mainstream medicine and mainstream evidence, a high proportion of anti-vaccination attitudes than in other medical specialties. For example, a 2002 article in the journal Vaccine found that 27% of surveyed chiropractors said that they advised against vaccinations.
27%?
Yeah.
Wow.
25% advised for vaccinations, and the other 50% didn't provide any advice to their clients or their patients.
Was there any statistics on what percentage of general practitioners?
I went looking for that because I was interested as well. I guarantee you it would be a lot less than 27%.
Yeah.
I also guarantee you that chiropractors are not qualified to give advice on vaccinations. There's nothing about chiropractic training that qualifies you to give advice on vaccination.
No.
Chiropractic training is highly variable, and licenses may or may not be required, and the requirements are based on jurisdiction.
Wow. So what is your training and qualifications? Where do you study?
There are chiropractic degrees. There are chiropractic schools. There are organizations worldwide that offer courses and things like that. But the length and depth of those courses varies pretty substantially. Some licensing is permanent. You get it once and you're qualified. Some requires regular training updates. It depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on the regulations of the country that you're practicing in. Many chiropractors point to the volume of their training, as some of the programs can be up to 5 years long.
Right.
And they point to it as a measure of the legitimacy of the practice. Many of the programs do include rudimentary or even advanced anatomy and disease diagnosis, but it's mostly theoretical and it varies in its level of scientific rigor. So there's also a really large proportion of marketing in these degrees or these qualifications, and there's very little actual physiology, as in like the theories that underpin disease, basically.
Right. What should marketing have to do with a medical practice?
Well, yes, a good point.
You've got to be able to sell it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting because I did look at a bunch of chiropractic journal articles, and there's a really high proportion that focus on the marketing of chiropractic, which is...
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre for a pseudo-medical journal to be talking about marketing and at that level.
Yeah.
Anyway, the main qualification that you get is called a Doctor of Chiropractic, which means that many chiros call themselves doctors. Which in a lot of places, including Australia, they're allowed to do because it's not a protected term.
Wow, okay.
The general feeling that I get from researching chiropractic is that they are desperate to legitimize it. It seems like they just really want to be taken seriously, and it seems to be working.
Yeah, wow, okay.
A 2015 Gallup poll in the US asked if the respondents found chiropractors trustworthy. More than half of the people agreed that they were trustworthy, and less than 10% disagreed, which is troubling because that, to me, says that, well, up to 90% either have no opinion on the trustworthiness of chiropractors or they actually do trust what they say, despite not having any actual proper medical training.
I guess if you put doctor in front of the name, though.
Mm-hmm. The thing is, even though they claim to treat all these other diseases, many people would only go to a chiropractor for a back injury. That seems to be the only thing that... it actually seems ridiculous when you say, I can cure your asthma by manipulating your spine. Most people would think, yeah, that does seem ridiculous.
Is that one of the claimed cures?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Okay. Maybe I ought to try that as well. I'm an asthmatic as well, and I've been on preventative medication for the last 25 years of my life.
Well, throw away that preventative medication, Levi, because if you go to a regular chiropractic appointment, you won't need it anymore.
Go and get an alignment, and I'll be done with the serotype. Forget about that.
Well, most people would acknowledge that sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, it does.
But they still are willing to go to a chiropractor to fix lower back injuries, which are very common and in a lot of cases debilitating. However, it speaks to the attitude of chiropractors in general that a 2010 New Zealand survey of chiropractic websites worldwide found that 95% of the 209 chiropractic websites that they looked at made unsubstantiated medical claims regarding the effectiveness of chiropractic treatment on headaches, migraines, colic, ear infection, neck pain, whiplash, or asthma.
Right, and they're just making big claims that people have to believe because they're a doctor.
The only condition that has any evidence whatsoever is lower back pain through spinal manipulation, but only 28% of the websites even mentioned lower back pain.
Oh, wow.
So that says to me that 95% of the chiropractors, that's 209 websites, it's not a small sample. 95% of those chiropractors believe that their treatment has effects that it demonstrably does not have. Simon Singh is a British journalist who wrote about this exact thing in 2009, and he was sued by the British Chiropractic Association for libel.
Whoa.
When he pointed out in a Guardian article that none of the claims were supported by scientific mainstream evidence. And that is a common theme as well. The chiropractic associations worldwide seem to be more than a little litigious, and I was a little worried reading all of this about doing a segment pretty much destroying chiropractic, but I don't think our podcast is quite large enough yet for them to come after me. But if we do get sued, there's no legitimate argument, basically, for them to sue. This guy, Simon Singh, and most people who criticize chiropractic are making legitimate arguments about the lack of scientific evidence in chiropractic. Right. And
so does the suit get thrown out?
Well, Simon Singh had the might of the Guardian newspaper, which is a very big worldwide newspaper, but it's especially big in Britain, had their funding behind him, and therefore he fought the case pretty hard and actually did a lot to progress the discourse of science in Great Britain, because you can't just be quietened by a libel suit for legitimate criticism of unscientific practices. That's just wrong.
Surely.
It's just wrong. But up until that point, many of the people who were sued, for example, if the Australian Chiropractic Association, I don't even know if that's a real thing, but if they came after me or us for putting this in our podcast, we would have to back down. We don't have the funds or the means to fight a lawsuit. We would probably have to pull this podcast and just deal with it because we don't have the means to fight it.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
So I'm not sure about the state of the laws in Australia, but the British Chiropractic Association withdrew their case in 2010 when they realised that they weren't going to win it, which is good. That's a step forward for scientific dialogue in mainstream media, I think.
That must have been painful to them. But the easiest way to fight anybody that's making a claim against you is to provide evidence otherwise. But this just goes to show how unmedical they are, because you look at any scientist or medical field, they will move with the times and they will move with new discoveries. And if there's a trial that's done and it finds that common practice is no longer effective, or it's dangerous in any way, they'll change, they'll modify their ways, and they'll stop doing that, or they'll do something else instead.
Yeah.
Whereas chiropractic is basically putting its hands over its ears and saying, we don't want to know about any of this evidence that says that we're not effective. It works, and we don't want to hear your arguments against it.
With chiropractic, someone says, look, here's the evidence, and I'm really not sure that you have any evidence to support your side. And then they go, no, shut up. It's so childish and ridiculous, but I think it just speaks to the attitude of big organisations like the British Chiropractic Association is the biggest chiropractic association in Great Britain, obviously, and their willingness to sue for such a small, it's very weak. So there is little but inconclusive evidence that spinal manipulation can be somewhat dangerous as well.
Right.
There are cases that where adverse effects have been shown, but it generally seems to be relatively harmless, except in rare cases. So I think that the fact that they're not causing any active harm, and the anecdotal evidence by people who regularly go to chiropractors kind of mean that they've been taken seriously for a lot longer than they should have been.
I guess there's a few reasons why people then, in that case, want to trust chiropractors. I mean, firstly, they've got doctor in front of their name. Secondly, if you go to them for lower back pain and they perform manipulation, it may fix it, which will probably lead you to believe that it was the chiropractic that fixed your back, and therefore the whole practice is legitimate and it could work on more than just the lower back pain.
I think a big part of the problem is that if you go to a doctor and say, I've got really bad back pain, the doctor will say, well, the best thing for that is rest, and here are some pain medication. And you go, oh, but I want to, it's really debilitating. I want to do stuff.
I want a quick fix. And crack my back, and I'll get on with it.
And so you go to a chiropractor, they crack your back. It may or may not help, but through the passage of time anyway, your back feels better, and you go, well, I'm glad I went and saw that chiropractor, because otherwise I just would have had to rest. And it feels like it would work, but that's not actually the case. Just in summary, the only condition that a chiropractor may help with is lower back pain. However, it may not be as effective, and it definitely will not be more effective than exercise therapy, rest, and analgesics. And it can have some adverse effects in rare cases. Further to the chiropractor's interest in, or the rejection of, mainstream medical interventions, and also their tendency to promote other pseudosciences like anti-vaccination and acupuncture, for example, which we'll get onto at some stage, I'm sure. Further to that, chiropractors are also more likely to recommend regular preventative visits.
Yeah.
And that is not supported by evidence in any way. Manipulation of your spine to prevent injury is not in any way supported by scientific evidence. The best way of preventing lower back injury is by improving core strength and stopping when you feel pain, basically.
Right, that was the two things that my physio said to me, was start doing core exercises to strengthen your core muscles, which acts like your body's own back brace. And then most importantly, stop it. When you're doing an activity that hurts and you start to feel it in your lower back, just stop to prevent re-injury.
So despite all of that, chiropractic continues to be a trusted profession. I'm putting trusted in inverted commas because it shouldn't be. It is included in many public health and health insurance programs, which is troubling, but makes sense if you think about it, because especially in the case of health insurance, if people trust chiropractors and swear by them and they want to go to a chiropractor, then they'll choose the health insurance that allows them to go to a chiropractor. And no health insurer is going to say no to money because the science doesn't support chiropractic treatment. Do you know what I mean? They're not going to go, oh, nah, we don't want your money because chiropractic isn't actually a real science, so you'll have to go somewhere else where they will offer chiropractic.
Of course, their number one concern is not with your health.
No, their number one concern is not with the scientific rigour of the treatments that they provide.
No.
Many of those programs include acupuncture as well, and things that are of varying levels of scientific rigour, shall we say.
And keep listening, because I'm pretty sure at some stage we're going to cover acupuncture on IdioFacto.
Yep, shotgun that one.
Oh, damn it. Okay.
To many chiropractors and supporters of chiropractic, the fact that there's no evidence to support the claims of chiropractic is no barrier to its practice. They simply feel that the evidence will eventually come. And you can't argue with that. That's proving a negative again. You can't argue that, well, yeah, but it'll just eventually there'll be evidence. We're just ahead of the curve. It's a weak argument. It's a logical fallacy. Mm-hmm. We've been through that before.
Yeah.
The thing that really bothers me is their desperation to legitimize themselves and the fact that we don't need chiropractors. Physiotherapists can do everything that chiropractors can do and more, and medical doctors are the best way of getting pain relief in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think chiropractic seems to be, probably out of any of the pseudoscience that we probably will cover, it's one of the more commonly believed practices out there. A lot of people go to chiropractors.
I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are just misinformed, or the narrative that chiropractic have tried to push in the last 60 years is one of legitimacy. And I think that regardless of whether or not you have been witness to the scientific evidence, it just sort of bleeds into the collective consciousness. But I think we should start our own chiropractic school, call ourselves doctors, and make bank.
Be a good quick way to get doctor in front of your name, that's for sure.
Yep. I have anecdotal evidence of a particular medical doctor now who originally was a chiropractor, and it just makes you wonder about what their views on science-based medicine really are.
Maybe we should get them on the show.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure this particular individual would be willing to help me out in any way, shape or form, but...
Maybe not.
I'm making myself sound like a real douchebag, aren't I? I'm actually a really nice guy. Yeah, I don't know why I make out like people hate me, because most people think I'm alright, don't they?
Anyway, next week on IdioFacto...
Don't! Why did you hesitate?
Okay. We study the science behind popularity of Mr. Matt McCabe.
Maybe we should put that in the pseudoscience section.
I'd actually like to leave you with a quote and an idea from a street performer of all people. I went to the Adelaide Fringe Festival on the weekend and I saw a show, and at the end of this street performer, he did a few magic tricks. At the end of the performance, as people were applauding, he said, "Just remember folks, magic is all around you. if you don't understand how science works.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I like that one.
Fantastic.
That's it for this episode of IdioFacto. Forward all suggestions, hate mail, evidence and arguments to idiofacto@gmail.com.
And you can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of the other socials at IdioFacto. Links will be in the show notes.